Okay, this is part 3 of session 6. This is part 3 is practicing righteousness for provision. This again, like the last part of Matthew 6 was in 3 examples, and we're going to get 3 examples here. And the other 3 examples, they had a consistency in terms of essentially saying the same thing, right? Don't do these things with with yourself in mind, where you're trying to promote yourself as opposed to have a relationship with God and seek reward from God. These 3 examples, they actually build on each other, right? They're intended to sort of lead you down a path to where you need to be. And so let's get into that. So the first one is storing up treasure. And this is Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. So let me read those. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so a couple of things. One, first of all, you should know that heaven, a lot of the time, it simply refers to sort of God and God's ways, God's directives and directions and things like that. So it's really storing treasures in God, right? It's not necessarily really talking about a place. And then the second thing is this is not talking about the provisions, the treasure that you need for just living your life, right? This is talking about, no, I'm socking it away so that I've got plenty, right? I've got all of this plentiness for whatever reason, right? And it's not necessarily that you're thinking, it's not that you're being greedy. It's not that you're necessarily super worried. Maybe you just think it's a good, prudent plan to have all these stores. Maybe it's good business, whatever, right? It's just, and God, God is saying that life is fleeting. And, we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And wealth can be easily lost. Even if you worked hard to earn that money, even if it didn't come to you easily, it can be lost very easily. And of course, eventually death is going to take that wealth away from you, right? You can't take it with you to the grave. And so at some point you're going to lose it. So, it just, beyond just, in terms of what we need to live, why do we need to store up this wealth? So what is all this getting at? It's really talking about accumulation over provision. So beyond what I need to live my life, above that is an accumulation of wealth. Talked about that. How we store our wealth in heaven is accomplished through generosity. Because if you start to think about, okay, if I'm taking this treasure, right, this abundance, I'm storing it in heaven. Well, I can't put it in heaven. So how do I do that? Well, God over and over again talks about giving to the poor, right? Helping to take care. Oh, okay. That's what God wants me to do. So if storing up treasure in heaven means I'm helping people with this extra, right? That I'm thinking about it that way. And so it's accomplished through generosity. And then how does it relate to the kingdom? Character qualities. I like, kindness. So kindness, this is, the gentle humility also means kindness. And so being useful to people, right? I'm being kind. Mercy. Maybe they don't deserve this help, right? But I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to have mercy on them. And then peacemaking. A lot of times, for example, a person who is struggling, say financially, their life is not peaceful. it's not peaceful. It's probably very stressful and in turmoil. There may be fighting in the family. What is it they say, that the number one reason why couples fight is financial problems, finances and stuff like that? Okay, well, if I'm helping out someone who's under those kind of stresses by helping to take care of a need, I brought peace into their life, right? So I'm living out that characteristic. And then how does it relate to self-sacrifice? Because I'm focused on other people's needs and what God wants over myself, right? I'm using that that accumulation, that abundance to help with other people's needs. So Acts is going to call that, so everybody's equal, right? Everybody's equal in the sense that they're getting their needs met. They may not be exactly equal. That's not the point, but the point is to make sure everybody's taken care of, that sort of thing. And so by doing that, I'm self-sacrificing. All right, second section is greed for possessions. And in this, this is Matthew 6:22 through 24. Let's read it. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. And it's interesting. They didn't really have necessarily the concept that meant light coming in. This really means it's like it's light shining out. When they say it's the lamp of the body, they mean that it's the thing that's lighting up the room, kind of thing. It's a little backwards from the way we think about it. Verse 23, but if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. Okay, so in other words, thinking about the way they think about this, if your eye is clear, then everything coming out around you will be clear. It'll be good, right? But if your eye is bad, then you're not going to be bringing that light out. And so it's going to be darkness, right? That's the way they think about it. They thought about it. Now, it's important to know that I'm just going to tell you this right now before we finish this, that, your eye is bad. The underlying thing would be you have an evil eye. And that's still a phrase that gets used sometimes. And it means that you're selfish and greedy. That's what that means. So if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters. Think about that. So if the light is in you is darkness, in other words, if your eye is not able to shine light out into the room because you're blind, for example, that's as dark as it gets. You walk out into a moonless night, there's still a little bit of light. You can still see a little bit. It's dark, but it's still light. But the most dark it can possibly be is if you are blind. Verse 24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. And this may actually, I've got it included in this. That little statement there might actually go with both the first one and this one. We'll assume it's for the second one here. And so the idea you're going to serve, if you're greedy, you're serving wealth. That's your God is wealth. And you're not able to bring light out, right? That what this means is that the idea that you're not able to help anybody if you're greedy, right? Because you're hoarding it, you're building it up for yourself and all this kind of stuff. And there's plenty of people who need help, but none of that's happening because you're withholding it because of your greed. And you're not serving God. You're not devoted to God. You're devoted to money. Now, so let's look at a few things. So if your eye is bad, we talked about that. The idea that means greed. This is accumulation of wealth versus the love of wealth. So, the first one that we looked at was accumulation of wealth. This one is the love of wealth, right? That's the greed. And that's the difference between the thing that we saw before, storing up your treasures in heaven instead of on earth. That's the accumulation of wealth, but it's not necessarily that you're greedy. In this case, you're accumulating wealth, but it's because of the love of wealth. So it has the same effect in both cases. You're accumulating beyond what you just need for life, and it's being used in a self-centered way. It's again an example of selfishness versus generosity, and that's really the take-home message, is the idea of that God is calling us to be generous, to help one another. And it relates to kingdom character qualities, relates to poor in spirit. You're like the opposite of that if you're doing this. Kindness, that if you're helping other people with abundance, mercy, and peacemaking, just like the one that we saw before. And then relates to self-sacrifice, by serving God through that generosity. So I'm sacrificing something of my own in order to serve God through helping other people, and I'm not going to serve myself with greed and selfishness. Okay, let's look at the last section here. This is worry about provision. This is the longest section here in Matthew 6. This is verses 25 through 34. So let me go through this and then we'll talk about it. For this reason, I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. Is life not more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the sky, that they do not sow, nor reap, nor gather crops into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more important than they? And which of you by worrying can add a single day to his lifespan? And why are you worried about clothing? Notice how the lilies of the field grow. They don't labor, nor do they spin thread for cloth. Yet I say to you that not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? Do not worry then, saying, what are we to eat, or what are we to drink, or what are we to wear for clothing? For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided to you. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. All right, so we saw that accumulation and greed are self-serving, but so is worry, right? Worry is a form of self-centeredness. It's, I'm worried, am I going to have enough, right? What happens if this happens or that happens, or maybe it's maybe you're living in a lower income situation, and I don't know where my next meal is coming from, and you're worried about that, right? And so again, it's a focus on self when we worry. It's natural when you think about that, and assuming that we're worrying about ourselves as opposed to worrying about somebody else. But this is a big thing. Worry denies trust. You can't say that you have faith, trust, and worry about the same thing. It just can't. It's that worry cancels out trust. God has promised to be our God, our Father, and to provide for us. Worry means that we don't trust him to keep his word. Worry leads us away from God's kingdom, his reign and rule, to seek out our own provision. And then when we serve self through accumulation, wealth, greed, or worry, we are rejecting God as God. We're going back to the old knowledge of good and evil. We're rejecting God as God. And the funny thing is, when we add worry into this, you can be poor and make the same mistake of this kind of selfishness that rich people make, right? So, it's not uncommon for rich people to either be wealth accumulating or greedy. But man, they can definitely be worried too. But even if a person doesn't have enough money to be doing wealth accumulation or be greedy, they certainly can worry, right? They definitely can do that, and it's the same trap. It's all focusing on myself instead of God. All right, so it relates, in this case, worry relates to, or not worrying, relates to the kingdom qualities of things like poor in spirit, kindness, mercy. I like in righteousness here in terms of, righteousness has to do with the making sure that I am eager to, I'm craving to be obedient to God, to trust him and be obedient to him. Well, how can I say that I'm craving that if at the same time I don't really trust him, right? Those two things don't go together. So if I'm not worrying about that stuff, then I can do this, right? I can think that way. If you think about, well, let me talk about self-sacrifice before I get to this point. So in terms of self-sacrifice, when we are seeking God's reign and rule, and subsequently his provision for us, then we need to deny ourselves, right? We need to self-sacrifice, because like we talked about with wealth accumulation, greed, and worry, I can't serve God in that way. So I have to sacrifice that in order to serve God. Otherwise, I'm serving money and self. And when you look at these three situations, the wealth accumulation, and God is calling us, be generous, give instead, and greed, don't be greedy, be generous and give. And the worry part, one of the ways that can manifest is it can be an excuse for one of the other ones, right? That, well, I'm worried about what's going to happen to the economy, so blah, 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 right? And, and it can sound perfectly reasonable, but God is telling us, it just means you don't trust me, right? You're just not trusting me. And so, we need to really think about this in terms of self-sacrifice, or it's going to be very challenging for us to actually walk out our kingdom life in terms of money. Now, I want to show you something. This is a sidebar, because we're going to go outside of the Sermon on the Mount for a minute. But I want to do this because I think this is it's really a good thing to see, and it ties into some of the stuff that we've learned in this session 6, and especially about fasting. And so I want to show a section from Isaiah that's going to really illustrate very clearly this idea of self-sacrifice in order to practice our righteousness. Serving God and not yourself is the key to practicing righteousness in the new covenant. And it is very clear, right? If you want to serve God, you can't really be serving yourself. And that kind of sacrifice is how we need to practice our righteousness. So I want to look at Isaiah 58, because it's just such it's a good, really good passage to really get this in our heads. This is Isaiah is largely about the coming of the new covenant, the why do they need a new covenant? Because they had failed so terribly bad at the Mosaic covenant, so they needed a new covenant. And then it's going to talk a lot about how the new covenant is going to come about and what's going to happen and what it's going to be like and all that kind of stuff. And so this is later when it's talking about that kind of stuff. Verse 6, is this not the fast that I choose? So just to set up a little bit here, right before this, God was saying, okay, so you're fasting and you're complaining that I'm not answering you. And that's because you're being jerks. And then he asks them a question. If the kind of fast they were doing, was that the kind of fast that he wanted? And that kind of fast was this showy fast. It was, humility of bowing down, putting on sackcloth, not eating and looking like you didn't eat, and sitting in ashes, and all this kind of cultural stuff that they would do to show their humility and their fasting. And he says, is that really the fasting that I want? And then in verse 6, he's going to ask the question again, but this time he means, isn't this the one that I want? Isn't this the fast that I choose? To release the bonds of wickedness, to undo the ropes of the yoke, right? So this is getting out of sin, right? The fast that I want is, I want you to get out of sin, right? Then moving on, and to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke. Not only do I want you to get out of sin, I want you to stop oppressing people. Verse 7, is it not, talking about the kind of fast that he wants, is it not to break your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into the house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh, right? So there's people who are in need, and isn't it the kind of sacrifice, the kind of humbling, the kind of fast that I want is for you to take care of people, right? That are in need, that are suffering. Take care of them. And in this last phrase, man, this is a gut check right here. And not to hide yourself from your own flesh. What that's talking about is where, you do like the priest and the Levite in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the Samaritan or the guy is, the Israelite is on the side of the road. He's been robbed and beaten up and he's half dead, and they don't want to get involved. So they're going to walk on the other side of the road and avoid him, right? That this is this idea of hiding yourself from your own flesh. These people that are in need, they're human beings like you, right? They're your cousin, because we're all sons and daughters of Noah, every single last one of us. And so we're just going to ignore this human being, this and hide, kind of go walk the other way and pretend like I'm not seeing and stuff like that. I don't know about you guys, but I've definitely done it. I've definitely done what he's talking about right there. He doesn't want us to do that. He wants us to sacrifice, to the fast that he wants, that sacrifice, because a fast is a kind of sacrifice. I'm sacrificing my body, my need for food and fulfillment of that for God. And he's like, I don't want this thing that you're doing. I want this, right? Verse 8, then if you'll do it this way, those three things, stop sinning, stop oppressing people, start helping people, right, who are in need. Do those three things. That's the fast. If you do that, verse 8, then your light will break out like the dawn, and your recovery will spring up quickly, and your righteousness will go before you. You're going to get the thing that you were fasting for taken care of, right? The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. I'm going to be here for you. I'm right behind you. I'm helping you. Verse 9, then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here I am, right? You know what? That's the whole reason they're fasting, is because they're crying out to God. They're trying to get his help, right? And he's telling you, you're doing this thing. You're doing these activities of humbling yourself. It's not what I want. I want these three things. And if you do those three things, I'm right there. I mean, you're going to call for help. I'm going to say, yep, I'm right here. I'm going to take care of it. If you remove the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, he's kind of going back through saying, get rid of that stuff. Verse 10, and if you offer yourself, self-sacrifice, right? If you self-sacrifice to the hungry and satisfy the need of the afflicted, then your light will rise in darkness and your gloom will become like midday. It's like, Jesus is just rewording this in a different way. In fact, we're not seeing this right now because you got to go above a little bit in Isaiah 58 to see this. This quote here is God giving to Isaiah prophetically what the Messiah is going to teach. That's what this is. And then let's see, where were we? Verse 11. And the Lord will continually guide you. He's going to be there with you. He's going to give you direction and help with your problems and things like that. And satisfy your desire in scorched places. In other words, the drought that you have in your life is, these needs that you have that are not being fulfilled. He's going to help you with that and give strength to your bones. Health issues, right? That's what that's talking about. He's going to help you with your health issues as you fast in the way that he's called for. And you will be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. In other words, your life will just flourish. If you're doing the fast that I'm calling for, stop doing this fast, do this fast. This is what I want, and I will take care of you. So I think this is really, really a great picture of what this whole section is talking about in terms of this self-sacrificing to practice our righteousness. All right, let's do a review of part 3. We must sacrifice our own selfish desires, seeking instead to serve God's kingdom, to be under his reign and rule through manifesting the kingdom qualities. The kingdom qualities, peacemaking and all that kind of stuff, they need to be living in our hearts, coming out of us. If we worry about where our provisions will come from, likely acting in accord with that worry, like we're going to do things that are in accordance with what we're worrying about, we demonstrate that we do not believe or trust God. We don't believe that he's going to take care of us. Kingdom people have their hearts focused on God, his righteousness, his people, his kingdom when it comes to the material needs of life, right? That I'm not worrying about, myself. I'm focused on other. I'm working. I should work and stuff like that. And I'm providing for my family and that kind of thing. But, I need to be thinking about, okay, well, how much of this is accumulation? How much of this is me just being greedy? How much of it is coming out of a place of worry and concern about, am I going to be okay and stuff like that? And reset my thinking to be kingdom focused. And what is it? We saw this in Isaiah 58. What is he calling for? Oh, he wants us to be focused on, the kingdom is overcoming, conquering sin, social justice, helping people who are oppressed and not oppressing people ourselves, and to give and to give a lot, to help people who are in need and sacrifice in significant ways. I think about the one that says, take the homeless into your home. Somebody who doesn't have a place to stay, take them into your home. And okay, that I think that there's a lot of pull towards hiding ourselves from our own flesh, and that, well, I don't really want somebody in my house, right? And even if they're a Christian brother, right? I don't know. No, sacrifice and help people. And then finally, kingdom people show their loyalty to God through self-sacrifice. What I didn't show you in that Isaiah 58 passage is he's basically saying at the beginning of it that, the problem is you guys aren't loyal to me, right? And that passage that we read was the demonstration of loyalty. This is how you need to be loyal to me, to God. Kingdom people show their loyalty to God through self-sacrifice, removing sin and oppression, and being generous to help all those in need. And I meant to say one thing on the worry part, that it's easy to sort of think about that in terms of if I'm worrying that I'm failing to trust God and to get worried about the worry, right? To kind of get into a vicious cycle about that. And so anytime we're having that sort of spinning wheel sort of situation, the way out is self-sacrifice. I reset and I think, okay, wait a minute. The way out of this self-centeredness is self-sacrifice. I need to find a way to self-sacrifice and focus on that, and it'll lead you out of that vicious cycle. Okay, that concludes session 6. For next time in session 7, we're going to wrap up the rulings part, which is going to talk about judgment. And then we'll also cover the last part of the Sermon on the Mount, the last section, which is where Jesus is going to give us some grave warnings. So until next time, I hope you are blessed.